In 1957, two young sisters in England, Joanna and Jacqueline Pollock, were killed instantly when a speeding car suddenly struck them during their walk to church. Their parents were shattered by the loss, but a year later they had twin daughters, Jillian and Jennifer, who as they grew began showing strange overlaps with the former girls' lives, recognizing toys they'd never seen, describing places they'd never visited, and developing an intense fear of cars. Jennifer was reportedly even born with birthmarks in the same locations as Jacqueline's. The memories eventually faded, but the Pollock twins became one of the most cited cases in discussions of childhood reincarnation, with some people believing it was true reincarnation and others arguing it was grief, suggestion, or outright coincidence. A 6-year-old boy from Missouri was subjected to a staged kidnapping orchestrated by his own family to teach him a lesson about stranger danger. Police say an aunt's coworker lured him into a truck, told him he'd never see his mother again, and threatened to nail him to the wall of a shed. When he started sobbing, the man showed him a handgun and ordered him to stop crying. Investigators say he tied the boy's hands and feet, covered his face, and drove him around for hours while the child begged to go home. Once back at the house, relatives brought him into the basement and kept the act going, lecturing him about strangers while he was still terrified and restrained. Multiple adults were later charged after authorities said the ordeal caused genuine trauma, inflicted by the very people meant to protect him. This is one of the rarest sights a hiker can ever witness, the Broken Spectre, where your shadow doesn't fall on the ground but appears to float like a giant ghost in the clouds behind you. When the sun hits a bank of mist at the perfect angle, your silhouette gets projected onto the fog and wrapped in a circular rainbow called a glory, creating the illusion of a towering figure surrounded by a halo. For centuries, mountaineers thought this was a supernatural omen since conditions have to line up perfectly for it to happen. Dense fog in front of you, clear sun behind you, and just seconds before the mist shifts and the whole apparition vanishes. Here's one of the rarest friendships ever recorded on camera. A Siberian tiger calmly strolling alongside a goat that was literally thrown inside its enclosure to be eaten. Everyone expected a routine kill like usual, but instead the tiger backed off, the goat stood his ground, and the two formed a bond no one could explain. They wandered the enclosure together like companions, stunning zookeepers as a predator and its intended meal lived in total harmony. After their unlikely bond went viral, the zoo kept them together under close supervision, naming them Timur and Amr. They stayed inseparable for months, sleeping near each other, exploring the enclosure, and even play fighting. But soon enough, instincts kicked in and the two became aggressive toward each other, ending one of the strangest animal friendships ever recorded. This was the moment when a Brazilian news reporter made the most horrific discovery of his life. While reporting on the disappearance of a 13-year-old girl who had recently drowned in Brazil's Miarim River, journalist Lenildo Frazão wanted to show viewers how quickly the riverbed drops off. As the cameras rolled, he jolted in shock and said he'd felt something like an arm brush against his leg. Hours later, rescue teams recovered the girl's body in that exact spot, confirming that Frazão had unknowingly stepped on her remains during the broadcast. The girl, named Raissa, had drowned after being pulled under by the river's hidden holes and strong current, and the journalist says he's now traumatized for life. This video shows a man holding his cat when he unknowingly steps on one of the deadliest animals on Earth, the eastern brown snake, the second most venomous snake in Australia, somehow slithering across his living room floor. Eastern brown snakes are so fast and defensive that a single bite can kill an adult man in minutes, causing paralysis, seizures, and cardiac collapse before help can arrive. The man is extremely lucky he stepped near the snake's head and pinned its movement, completely unaware until after watching the footage that he was only inches away from a strike that could have easily ended both his life and his cat's. This was the moment when a pool cleaner spotted everyone's worst nightmare at the bottom of a backyard pool, the family dog completely motionless. The dog likely snuck into the pool area when the man opened the gate and fell in without anyone noticing. Luckily, the cleaner didn't hesitate, jumping straight into the water and dragging the lifeless dog to the surface before immediately starting chest compressions on the patio. After nearly a minute of desperate attempts to revive the dog, he suddenly gasped, coughed up water, and came back to life. A clutch rescue that hopefully earned the pool cleaner a decent tip. This woman is lucky to be alive after a cassowary casually walked up to her on a quiet beach, a bird often called the world's most dangerous for a reason. Native to parts of Oceania, cassowaries have dagger-like claws that can easily disembowel you with a single kick, and they've been responsible for multiple serious injuries and even fatal attacks when people panic or get too close. But this woman did the right thing by staying calm, since cassowaries are most aggressive when they feel threatened or startled. By remaining still and non-threatening, she kept the encounter from escalating into the type of attack the species is infamous for. July 5, 2011, 37-year-old Kelly Thomas, a homeless man with schizophrenia, was beaten, pinned down, and repeatedly tased by Fullerton police during a violent encounter captured on audio and surveillance footage. Officers had responded to a call about someone allegedly breaking into cars, and when they found Thomas rummaging through trash near a bus depot, they claimed he became uncooperative during questioning, a claim later disputed by witnesses and contradicted by portions of the footage. As officers piled on top of him, Thomas screamed for his father, begged them to stop, and cried out that he was being killed. Prosecutors later noted he said, "Dad, help me," 31 times, "Help me, God," 26 times, and "Okay" or "I'm sorry" over and over as he slipped into unconsciousness. He arrived at the hospital in a coma with severe head trauma, multiple broken bones in his face, irreversible brain swelling, and died 5 days later. 2 officers were charged, including one for second-degree murder, but both of them walked free after the case collapsed in court. Russian fitness influencer Dmitry Nuyanzin has died after collapsing during a workout, and investigators say his body had been pushed to the absolute breaking point. The 32-year-old had recently been filming a 10,000-calorie bulking challenge while still cutting water for photo shoots and reportedly cycling stimulants and anabolic agents. Friends said he'd been complaining of dizziness and chest pain but kept training to keep up the content. When he collapsed at the gym, doctors couldn't revive him, and the autopsy showed his heart was severely enlarged and overloaded, more like that of a much older man. Experts concluded he suffered sudden cardiac failure triggered by a perfect storm of extreme overeating, chemical strain, dehydration, and relentless overtraining. Nicholas Kunzelman and Stephanie Hart Grizel survived the Columbine shooting in 1999, only to be mysteriously murdered less than a year later. On February 13, 2000, Stephanie went to visit Nicholas while he was closing the Subway restaurant just a mile from their high school. Hours later, an off-duty employee noticed the lights still on, walked in, and saw an unknown young man leaving. Inside, he found both Columbine teens shot to death behind the counter. Nothing was stolen, so it wasn't a robbery, and the witness gave a detailed description of the suspect, but he was never found. Investigators later uncovered a drug ring operation out of that Subway, but there was no link to the teens. To this day, the killer has never been identified. Susan King spent 6.5 years in prison for a murder she couldn't possibly have committed. She had one leg, weighed under 100 pounds, and didn't even own a car. Yet police claimed she beat, shot, and dragged a man before tossing his body off a bridge 40 miles away. The lead detective built the entire case on lies, fake ballistics, drag marks that were actually water damage, and blood evidence that never matched the victim. And investigators later admitted they had doubts about her guilt before it even went to trial. But terrified of facing life in prison or the death penalty, Susan took a plea deal and went to prison for murdering a man she never even laid her hands on. Years later, a different man confessed in detail to the murder, even describing facts never released to the public, and even claimed the same detective threatened him to stay quiet. Only then was Susan exonerated, and the state eventually paid her $750,000. The detective who framed her never faced charges. He simply retired while under investigation for unrelated sexual misconduct. This was the moment when officers found Marvin Morales lying unresponsive on the floor of a station bathroom. A California sheriff's deputy who just overdosed on cocaine he'd stolen from people he arrested, which later tested positive for fentanyl. Deputies had to rush in and administer Narcan to revive him, and he was fired soon afterward. But on December 2nd, 2025, Morales resurfaced in the most horrific way imaginable. That morning, he stabbed his 11-year-old son multiple times inside their own home, while the boy's 6-year-old sister hid nearby, too terrified to move. Deputies who arrived described blood pooled near the entryway, and signs the boy had tried to crawl toward the front door. Morales fled before anyone could reach him, leading to a pursuit down Interstate 5 that ended when spike strips shredded his tires. As the car crashed to a stop, he reportedly drew a weapon, forcing officers who had worked with him in the past to shoot him. Morales died hours later at the hospital, while the sheriff called the crime one of the most devastating his department had ever encountered. This was the moment when a DoorDash delivery driver was caught on camera spraying something into a family's Arby's order, seconds after dropping it off and taking a picture before casually walking away. Indiana man Mark Cardin said when his wife began eating, she immediately started choking, gasping, and vomiting, and her husband noticed a strange residue coating the inside of the bag. After reviewing the footage, he realized the driver had allegedly pepper sprayed the food on purpose for reasons no one can explain. The sheriff's office is now investigating, and the case could lead to a felony consumer product tampering charge, the kind filed when a regular delivery turns into a potentially life-threatening attack. A 10-pound mini dachshund named Valerie vanished during a camping trip on Kangaroo Island, then somehow survived 529 days alone in the Australian bush. Rescuers spent months trying to trap her, stunned that such a tiny house dog had endured snakes, heat, and feral predators long enough to actually gain weight. Some think she lived off roadkill, while others believe someone was feeding her, since no one can explain how she lasted nearly a year and a half in one of the harshest landscapes in the world. When she was finally caught using a trap baited with her favorite toys and her owner's clothes, vets found her fit and well, closing one of the most improbable pet survival stories ever documented. Before fame, Charlie Heaton lived in a dangerous squat in London while touring with a noise punk band. He's talked about waking up to overdoses in the building, sleeping on floors, surviving on almost no money, and performing in violent clubs where fights routinely broke out. In 2017, he was detained at LAX for cocaine traces in his luggage and temporarily barred from entering the US. Carol Buono's childhood was marked by a near-fatal accident that almost killed her decades before she ever appeared on Stranger Things. At 11 years old, she was struck by a speeding car while walking home in New York, suffering severe injuries and head trauma that required long-term recovery and left her with memory gaps from that entire year of her life. Finn Wolfhard has dealt with disturbing stalking-level behavior since he was barely a teenager. At 14, he said grown adults were waiting outside of his hotel rooms, following him to filming locations, and even tracking down where his family lived, forcing security to intervene more than once. In one of the creepier incidents he's discussed publicly, a group of adult fans learned his exact shooting schedule and routinely appeared wherever he was working, standing silently across the street, something he said made him feel hunted. Josephine Myrtle was born in 1868 with a rare genetic anomaly known as diphagus. Her body was completely normal down to the waist, but below it she had 2 pelvises and 4 legs. This is what toilets looked like in many medieval castles. There were a few cases of assassins climbing up these poop chutes and waiting for their targets to sit down before killing them. In 1977, the drummer for Lynyrd Skynyrd survived the plane crash that killed half the band. He then walked to a nearby house for help only to be shot by the homeowner. He apparently saw a bloody long-haired man and fired a warning shot that hit the drummer in the shoulder. Once Pyle shouted that there was a crash, the farmer helped him and he went on to fully recover. In the original story of Peter Pan, Peter murders members of the Lost Boys when they grow too old. He did this because being an adult was against the rules in Neverland. In the middle of battles with pirates, Peter would also switch sides to kill members of the Lost Boys just for fun. Up until the 1800s, Turkish women who were accused of cheating on their husbands were tied up in a sack filled with cats, then thrown in the ocean. In 1977, 20-year-old Colleen Stan was kidnapped while hitchhiking in California. She was locked in a box the size of a coffin under her kidnapper's bed for 7 years. She had to lie still and couldn't make any noise for 23 hours a day in pitch-black darkness. Her kidnapper was only caught when his wife finally reported him to police. Steve Jobs could have avoided a premature death from cancer by having it properly treated. Instead, he refused surgery for 9 months and favored dietary treatments and other alternatives. Shortly before he died, he claimed that it was one of his biggest life regrets. With a 9% fatality rate, being the president is by far the most dangerous job in America. Hours before his death, Edgar Allan Poe was acting delirious in the streets of Baltimore. He was wearing another man's clothing and was unable to explain how he got there. While many ideas have been put forth, his cause of death remains a mystery to this day. In 2018, a 66-year-old Canadian man was arrested for murdering 8 people over a 7-year span. During that time, he worked as a mall Santa in Toronto. In 1932 Arizona, a man dressed as Santa Claus jumped out of a plane to parachute into a Christmas parade. Sadly, his parachute failed to open and hundreds of parents had to cover their kids' eyes as Santa plummeted to his death. This is a photo of a man dressed as Santa Claus visiting dying workplace children in a hospital ward in 1906. In December of 1980, a 19-year-old girl from Minnesota was involved in a car accident in sub-zero temperatures. After the crash, her car wouldn't start, so she walked towards a friend's house who lived 2 miles away. When she was just 15 feet from her friend's front door, she collapsed. That night, temperatures dropped to negative 30 degrees Celsius, and no one was around to help her. 6 hours later, she was discovered frozen solid. She was immediately transported to a nearby hospital, but her skin was too hard to even pierce with a needle. Amazingly, she was still alive, but her pulse was only measured at 12 beats per minute. Hoping for a miracle, doctors wrapped her in a heated blanket, and 2 hours later, she regained consciousness. After 49 days in the hospital, she completely recovered and suffered no permanent damage to any part of her body. In 1941, Soviet archaeologists wanted to open up the tomb of Timur, aka Tamerlane. He was a Turco-Mongol conqueror from the 14th century who is often regarded as one of the greatest military leaders of all time. However, locals urged the Soviets not to do so since it was believed that opening the tomb would curse the world. This was mainly due to the inscription on his tomb which read, "When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble." And inside his casket, there was another mysterious note that read, "Whoever disturbs my tomb will unleash an invader more terrible than I." But despite the warnings, Joseph Stalin ordered for Tamerlane's body to be exhumed. Just 3 days later, Adolf Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa and invaded the Soviet Union. In 2017, a billionaire from Brazil announced that he was gonna bury his Bentley for his afterlife. After receiving a lot of online hate for his wasteful decision, he revealed that it was simply a publicity stunt for organ donations. He said people bury things that are much more valuable than cars and nobody seems to care. Patty Mallet became pregnant at age 17 and was pressured by multiple people to abort the baby, but she refused. That baby was Justin Bieber. The Titanic fired 8 emergency flares before it sank. A ship in the area saw the flares and that the boat looked uneven in the water. But the captain didn't believe that the rockets were fired in distress, so he didn't take action. If he had, all of the Titanic's passengers could have been rescued, but instead help didn't arrive for more than 2 hours. In 1856, a woman died just after giving birth to a Greek monk named Mihailo Tolotos. The very next day, the baby was taken to a monastery on top of Mount Athos. He then spent his entire 82-year life completely isolated from women. He's the only known man in history to have lived and died without ever seeing a woman. While this may look like a regular city upon first glance, it's actually the world's largest cemetery. Located in Iraq, the Valley of Peace contains over 5 million bodies. Joseph Matheny was a serial killer from Baltimore who was active from the 1970s till the 1990s. Following his arrest, Joseph not only confessed to killing numerous men and women, he also claimed that he used their meat in the burgers that he sold out of his food truck. This is a comparison of a pug in 1880 versus what the breed looks like today. The pug was selectively bred to feature an extremely flat face, which has contributed to severe breathing difficulties as well as eye problems in many of these dogs. If a person dies on a plane during a flight, their body is typically moved to an empty first-class seat until the plane lands. After the Titanic disaster, the U.S. Congress passed a law requiring passenger vessels to carry more lifeboats. But the added weight made one ship called the SS Eastland too top-heavy. In 1915, the ship capsized before even leaving the dock, killing 844 people. This is a photo of Anne Frank's father Otto revisiting the attic where they hid from the Nazis. Sadly, he was the only surviving member of the family as his 2 daughters died just weeks before their camp was liberated. In 1783, a boy was born with 2 heads, but one of the heads was upside down. Surprisingly, the other head was somewhat functional, and the boy even claimed that he could hear the other brain talking to him. Tigers are some of the most vengeful animals on the planet and will take revenge on anyone who has wronged them. In 1997, a Russian poacher shot a tiger and left him for dead before stealing part of his meal. The tiger later found the poacher's cabin and waited 12 hours for him to arrive before killing and eating him. In the 1920s, not much was known about the effects of radium. So when a group of women were paid to use glow-in-the-dark radioactive paint, they were told that it was completely harmless. But after years of licking the tips of their paintbrushes while using this radium-based paint, the devastating effects eventually became obvious. Many of these women developed a condition known as radium jaw, which caused horrible tumors around the mouth, and some of their jaws would literally fall off. The ancient Romans would often substitute criminals into plays for punishment. So if a character died in the story, a real criminal would die on stage. The ancient Aztecs built swords out of obsidian, which is said to be 50 times sharper than surgical steel. These swords were apparently sharp enough to decapitate not only a human with one strike, but also a horse. The scold's bridle was a device that was used to publicly humiliate women until the 19th century. On the inside, the device had a metal plate that would press down on the tongue and prevent the wearer from speaking. It was placed on women who were said to be troublesome to keep them quiet and prevent them from gossiping. This is a powerful photo of a starving Ugandan boy holding the hand of a missionary in 1980. For many years, the lead singer of Lynyrd Skynyrd told his bandmates that he wouldn't live to the age of 30. His dad reported that even when he was a child, Ronnie would often say, "Daddy, I'll never be 30 years old." When his father asked why he kept saying this, Ronnie would just reply, "Daddy, that's my limit." Sure enough, when he was 29 years old, Ronnie Van Zant died in a plane crash. This photo was taken on the morning of April 15th, 1912, just a few miles south of where the Titanic went down. The steward who took the photo had not yet heard about the sinking of the Titanic. What caught his attention was the smear of red paint across the base of the iceberg, indicating that it had collided with a ship. Little did he know there were about 1,500 dead bodies in the depths below him. In 1962, a Cuban boxer named Benny Paret made fun of his opponent Emil Griffith for being a homosexual. Griffith ended up beating Paret so badly that he fell into a coma and died 10 days after the fight. In 2007, a woman woke up in the middle of a surgery where doctors were removing one of her eyes. She was aware of everything going on for hours but couldn't tell the doctors to stop. She says the experience was so horrific that she thought she had died and gone to hell. As horrible as the Holocaust was, one man truly stood out as one of the most evil of all Nazis involved. Dr. Joseph Mengele was tasked with conducting genetic research on human subjects at Auschwitz concentration camp. His work focused primarily on twins, with very little regard for the safety or suffering of his patients. Some of his horrific experiments included removing organs without anesthesia, injecting toxic dye into eyeballs, and even sewing twins together at the skin. Most of his patients ended up dying after these operations, but those who didn't often wish they had. What's perhaps most disturbing is that after the Holocaust, Dr. Mengele escaped to South America, where many say he continued his brutal experiments in a less organized manner. He lived for more than 30 years after the end of the war and died on a beach in Brazil. In 1969, an astrologer warned John Lennon that he would be shot on an island. John was so disturbed by this that it caused him to cancel an upcoming yacht trip around the Greek islands. 11 years later, John Lennon would be shot and killed on the island of Manhattan. The day after Robin Williams died, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline received the highest number of calls in its history. It is estimated that there are still approximately 40 million slaves in the world today. About 70% of them are women, while 25% of them are children. The Bunker brothers were a pair of conjoined twins who made the term Siamese twins popular. They were a famous sideshow act in North Carolina until one day one of the brothers woke up to find that his twin had died. In a panic, he called for a doctor to perform an emergency separation, but it was already too late. He would die just 3 hours after his brother. You can literally die from pooping too hard, and it's actually pretty common. Nearly all cases involve people with bad hearts, who just pushed a little too hard. One of the most notable people who died this way is Elvis Presley. Up until the 1950s, cigarettes were used to treat people with asthma along with other pulmonary conditions. 30 years ago, you had about 17 minutes to escape a house fire. Today, that's down to about 3 to 4 minutes due to many of the highly flammable synthetic materials used in furniture. After a mass shooting, you would expect complete silence at the scene of the crime. But police say one of the eeriest things is all of the phones that ring when family members are trying to find out if their loved ones are okay.